Hello, everybody. We are getting ready for the Relax with Rise talk story with Emma Powell and Sasha Smith of Rise Capital Investments. But it's a really laid back event, and we just want to kind of get some updates from Emma, who just came from Bigger Pockets Conference, which is one of the biggest conferences in real estate investing, and also give you guys some updates on some deals we're working on. And also next week we'll be having another, a more formal webinar. So we'll wrap that all in together. But Emma, where are you? Where are you now?
I'm in a gazebo in Orlando. So this is kind of the cool part of real estate investing. I think that I wanted to talk about this as a conference too, because it was something that came up repeatedly over and over and over again in one of the classes that I was in. But we wanted to travel with the kids. I used to live abroad when I was in college. I lived in the Czech Republic for like 4 or 5 months, and I taught English at the South Bohemian University and really enjoyed the experience. And when I got back, I've been looking. I think I was 19 when I did that. I've been looking for over 20 years to try and get back abroad, to move abroad again, and traveling and all of that. So I feel like this lifestyle has been something that's been a long time coming, and sometimes there were years where I would feel like there was no point in thinking about it, talking about it, dreaming about it, because we just would put it off for so long. We had so many kids, and my husband had an in office job, but for about 10 years he had a job where he only worked on call from 8 to 5. And so he did most of his stuff from home, and then occasionally he would have to go on location. And so we couldn't leave the area. But when we started homeschooling the kids, and he was only working a couple hours a week, and I thought this is just, it's like this little thin thread tying us here. If we could just figure out the income portion, we could travel and go do fun stuff. So when he finally left his job last year, I said, let's just go on a big adventure. And I asked the kids, like, where do you want to go? And they're like, Disney, or water parks, amusement parks. And so I didn't want to move to California because I don't want to invest in California. And I said, but I'll move to Florida. So when I saw that the Bigger Pockets conference was in Orlando, I said, well, we're already going to Orlando about that same time of year, because I had another conference I went to in Hawaii. And I thought we just go straight from Hawaii over to Florida, and we're going to stay for like a year or so. So we're at my husband's, his aunt's house, who lives in Palm Coast, and just out in her backyard in her gazebo, just enjoying the beautiful weather and just the more laid back lifestyle, just traveling around. So I think this was a common theme that came up at the conference again and again and again, was lifestyle design. And people are feeling very frustrated because they got into real estate investing for more passive income and to spend more time with their families and more time doing things that cost money, like travel. And they're not getting the freedom that they thought, or it's taking longer than they thought it would, or they're having a hard time giving up control over their assets to passively invest so that they can get that lifestyle. But I think a lot of people have just kind of forgotten why they got into it in the first place. It's about designing your lifestyle the way you want. Not everybody wants to travel around in an RV with a bunch of kids, right? But that's what we wanted to do. And so that was probably my biggest takeaway from the conference, is those conversations. And we could talk a little bit more about that, um, what those looked like, and the kind of the conclusions that I drew from the classes that I was going to and the investors that I was networking with.
Yeah, because I like these conferences too, because you can catch up with a lot of investors there that are in different markets using different strategies and all kind of seeing different things, but also have a big takeaway from what they're doing, or if they're shifting into any other strategies because their current one isn't working, and get
Mm-hmm.
more insight, from the people there that are doing so many different things. So I guess, what was one of the things that you're seeing that people are doing differently now in this current market?
Well, one of the things that we talked about a lot was the interest rates are not going down. If you're going to look at historical trends for interest rates, what we'll see is a bottoming out, and then they go up and up and up, and then there's a peak, and then they come down. And it's jagged line. They might dip a little bit over that period. And so if we're going to just go by historical data, the interest rates are not going to be coming down for probably quite some time. We may see small dips, but we're going to see more raises than dips in not just my opinion, but if, like, again, just looking at historical data. Now, is it always going to follow the historical data? No, it rhymes, but it's not the same. And so looking at that and realizing that as interest rates go up, prices are going to flatten and maybe even go down eventually. So the days of the rapid appreciation, because as the interest rates go down, there's more demand for the product, and when demand is higher, if the supply is not going to change, then especially during this housing shortage, the only way for the pricing to go is up, because new supply adding in this multifamily, it takes a while for it to hit the market. And so we're not going to see those prices going up the way that they were. So you can't just buy a building for and double the price of it in 5 years, and 2 to 3x people's investments in 3 years, the way that we've been seeing. And so the shift from that, if you're not investing for appreciation, what else is there to invest for? Well, you have cash flow and you have tax advantages. And I would even include tax advantages into cash flow, because the less taxes you pay, the more cash flow you're having come in, because you're only taxed on money that you actually make. You're not getting taxed on appreciation. You're not getting taxed on unrealized gains. You're only getting taxed on money that's actually coming in to your bank account. And so I'm going to just lump taxes into cash flowing investments. And so we are looking at more debt investing. And for me, this coincided very well, because when my husband left his job at the end of last year, the end of November, he was planning on quitting, and he ended up getting laid off like 2 months before he was planning on quitting. So it ended up being a really good deal for us, because he got severance and unemployment while he was looking for a replacement job. And towards the end of that unemployment, he was just like, well, I haven't found anything suitable, so just forget it. We're going to stay, become self-employed basically, and start this fund. But we didn't have our cash flow game sorted out when he left his job. And so our income looks like this. And it's really stressful in between. You get a big chunk of cash because you sell a property, something refinances, who knows, like these chunks that come in. But we don't know when the next chunk is coming is the problem. And so in between the chunks, we have this much money coming in from our rentals, and knowing there's a chunk coming, but not knowing when. So we are just living super, super lean, just trying to stretch it out, because we just don't know what's coming up. And so our cash flow strategy has dramatically changed over the last year and a half, like the year since he left, but certainly the 6 months before he left, where we're transitioning equity over into investments that are more cash flowing. So cash flowing investments smooth out the income, and they're tough to do when appreciation is going through the roof, because cash flowing things like debt or older buildings, businesses, they don't tend to cash flow at the same rate of return as an equity investment, where you're getting 15-18%, and your debt you're only getting only 10 to 12%. And it's kind of a funny aside. When I was the first time I was approached to do a hard money loan on a property, we had never done any real estate before. It was a friend of ours who was full-time real estate investor. His uncle wrote literally, if I said the name, he wrote the book on real estate investing, like in the early 80s. And so he knew what he was doing, and we were very, very good friends. Like we had Thanksgiving together and like went on vacations together. He came to us and he offered us a hard money loan on a house that he wanted to flip, and he said, I'll pay you 10%. And I was like, oh, that sounds like too good to be true. That sounds kind of risky, because if people say it's too good to be true, then it must be true. But then I realized when I turned that down, still kind of kicking myself for that, turned it down. And then I realized, as I started getting to real estate investing myself several years later, that 10% is normal. And so people get really used to 15 or 16 or 18% on an equity investment. And then they're like, oh, only 10% or 12% on a hard money loan.
But then again, that's only typically for the debt is over the course of a year, right? Which
Yes.
is in equity, that 18 or however many percent is over, can be over however many, 3 to 5 years.
And I think that that's a really good point, because most investors are not looking at when that cash is coming in. So let's say it's a 15% return, but it's a 5-year hold time. You may make 15% per year. If you average out that big chunk you get at the end, and those little tiny chunks you're getting along the way, divide that by 5 evenly, and you're going to average 15% per year. But that doesn't mean you're actually getting 15%. You're getting 5, 7, and then the last year you made like 40, right?
Right.
And so, yeah, and so doing cash flow investing helps to smooth out those bumps that we were talking about, the huge spikes and then the lean times when you're waiting for the next spike. Having reliable income was really a theme that most of the investors, because we go to network in the hallway mostly, and so as people, the keynotes are predicting kind of what's going to happen, and people are investing in or networking in the hallway, and we're all talking about cash flow, reliable cash flow, because we know those huge appreciation things, that we're going into a period where those values are going to start to flatten out. And
Mm-hmm.
so that was the biggest takeaway that I had. And again, cash flow for those investors who are burned out. I mean, we talk to our investors who are working high paid W-2 jobs, or maybe they have a professional degree that they really enjoy, like they're engineers or data scientists or medical professionals. They're making great money, but they're really burned out. And they say, I want to retire in 5 years. I want to retire in 10 years, right? They probably have enough money saved up over the next 5 to 10 years that they can retire, but they don't know how to solve the cash flow problem. It's like they've been investing in their IRA and not even thinking about cash flow. But when you retire, suddenly cash flow becomes the number one priority of what you're investing for. And so people have different goals. And when you say, oh, what you invest in depends on your own goals. And I'm like, well, I know my goals, but I don't actually still know what that means. Like, how do I invest to reach those goals? So if you're investing for high yield, think that those opportunities are going to be harder to come by in the future, the next couple of years. But if you're investing for cash flow, those are going to be easier to come by, and you will be able to plan your retirement better based on the cash that's coming in, and try and keep that as smooth as possible. It's never going to be as smooth as like a W-2, right? But it will definitely be, the feast or famine that most of us who aren't investing for cash flow are going through. So we're in that process ourselves of smoothing that out. And other investors who are kind of thinking like, okay, I'm sitting on $10 million of equity in my rental portfolio. What do I do with it? And I think the question is not what do I do with $10 million? It's what do I do with $1 million, $2 million? Because $2 million invested at an average of 10% per year is like 200 grand, right? That's a pretty decent income for most people. And you still have another $8 million sitting in your rental portfolio that you're not touching. So start out with a portion of it, 10%, maybe 20%, and stick that into some passive stuff. Free up your time. Learn to trust the people that you're investing with. They don't trust themselves to make good decisions, and they don't trust the other person to be running a good business. It's all like, only I'm running a good business. Everybody else is careless. They are not going to care about my money. Find people who do. Find people who care about your money. Set aside a certain percentage of your net worth or your investable cash, whichever makes more sense for you, and just stick it in something. Nobody's saying invest your entire net worth in a certain way. That would be irresponsible. I don't do that. I don't propose anyone does that. And our fund reflects that that's the way we invest. I have private loans. I have somewhere I'm a complete limited partner, somewhere I'm a minor joint venture partner, major joint venture, somewhere I'm a managing partner, and others where I'm the sole owner. I make more money off the sole owner stuff, but it's a whole lot more work. And so I wanted to put some in where I'm a complete limited partner, and everywhere along the spectrum in between. Some things we were investing for high yield. Right now we're only investing for cash flow, but we will go back to yield investing when we get the cash flow kind of sorted out. So just saying, okay, how much of my money, how much of my retirement fund, how much of my equity portfolio do I want to invest passively versus actively? And just making that decision, because I felt like there was a lot of all or nothing talk, because I think we investors tend to be all or nothing kind of people.
Right. Well, and then at those conferences too, it's more so about getting people to actually take action. So you have to like shake them a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, I think we're both in the same situations of, I do have my regular, my rentals that I own on my own. I have joint ventures of RV parks, office buildings, and just really like diversified. And then the fund, right, with the debt and equity, I really like that we have two different avenues that people can go. And especially because I started, lending on my own and seeing like, oh, wow, even though I'm not making as much as I did when on my own rental properties, I self-manage. There's still a lot of headaches that I deal with on the daily basis with those rentals. But this is just another way, you have to think about too, how much time do you have to actively run a business? Because owning rental properties is a totally separate business. And so when I think about people, when they think, oh, I have to get into real estate and they're working, they're like, oh, but I don't know if I want to buy a rental and deal with all of that. This is just another avenue for people. And I was just on the phone yesterday with another potential investor who was looking, he invested in crypto, invested, his retirement, and we're just looking for options, right? And I think that is just key of people, even one, knowing that investing passively is an option, but two, kind of being open-minded to, hey, I have, these other investments, maybe I'll try this. And like you mentioned, don't go all in with your entire net worth. And, that's kind of more so gambling in it, unless you're going to be super active, right? And have a pulse every day on things. But I think, like you mentioned, just having a little bit here and there, and then having a more predictable income from your investments is key, especially after you retire. You don't want to be on this roller coaster ride when you're, supposed to be relaxing and spending time with your grandkids.
Yeah, and the only way to retire is to have passive income. Unless you're going to be on the government assistance or you're living with a family member who's going to cover all your bills, which I guess that's another way. Who really wants to do it that way? But the only way to retire is to have passive income. And so we're very used to that concept with the market, where we can put everything in our max out our 401ks, get invested in our market, and maxing out our IRAs, right? And then we're going to put it in, an S&P 500 index fund or a total market index fund, and we're going to stuff enough money in there until $2 million, $3 million, $4 million, right? And then we're going to live on the 4% roll. That's normal. That's what everybody's doing. The concept in real estate isn't actually any different. The main difference from the execution is that we're getting higher than average returns. And so you can live on the 8% rule or the 10% rule. And so you still need to have a bunch of money socked into these investments, and you can build that money faster because you're getting higher returns all along. But eventually you're going to be living on completely passive income eventually when you get ready to retire. 99% of the investors that I talk to say, I want to retire in 5 to 10 years. It doesn't matter if they're 35 or 45 or even 55. 5 to 10 years, I hear over and over and over and over and over again. So what are you going to do? That 10-year mark is approaching and you have a huge rental portfolio and you've never invested passively because you're trying to grow. You don't just take $1 million of equity or $10 million of equity and convert that over to passive overnight. I have people call me who got an inheritance, or they've been saving up all their bonuses. Maybe they're only living on one spouse's income and they're just stocking up money. And I know that for most people, this sounds fantastical, right? Like, who is it ever happened to, right? But I have a lot of my investors that I know are sitting on $1 million in cash, $750,000 in cash. And if you add in their retirement, their liquid accounts, like their stock accounts, some of them are sitting on $2 million of liquid, maybe $1 million in cash and another $1 million liquid in the stock market. And my first thing is just like, it's burning a hole in their pocket. They feel like they need to do something with it. It's the most money they've ever had in their lives, and they don't know how to handle it. I said, it's going to take you a good 2 to 3 years to get this amount of cash deployed, because you're going to put 50,000 here, 50,000 there. Maybe you want to buy a couple of rentals, and that's going to take a couple hundred. Maybe you want to partner on something when you get more experience. You want 3, 4, 500,000 to be able to put over that. Just hold your horses and start learning. And they deploy very, very slowly, because that's a lot of money to be responsible for, and they don't want to mess it up. So in order to diversify, you just go very slowly, take your time. Well, imagine that you have a bunch of equity and you're not sitting on cash, you're sitting on a bunch of equity. You have to sell that one property at a time and redeploy that. So it's a process that takes a year to at least to get equity or cash deployed into passive.
And you recently did that, right, with a few of your properties?
Yeah, so it was tough to sell because I felt like we were coming off the peak of the market and I didn't want to sell. But trying to time the market is almost a recipe for disaster. I had to really just close my eyes halfway and dollar cost average out the same way I dollar cost averaged in. And that was was a tough mental game. But in the grand scheme of things, it didn't really change. Very much. I mean, the values weren't like crashing. It was just not as good as they were. So we basically had to sell a few things so that we could invest in more cash flowing things so that we could pay our bills. Because when you don't have active income, the only active income I have right now is through our fund, and I don't have a side hustle. I'm not teaching online courses. I'm not doing anything.
You don't
else.
have your real estate license.
I have my real estate license. Like, we don't have any other active income, and so we're living off of our small rentals, on the distributions from our passive investments. And some of those are kind of new, and so they're not really paying a lot of distributions yet, because again, it's more of an upside back end thing. So we sold off a couple of houses that I felt like were a little bit ticking time bombs because they're getting older, and I didn't want to have like a huge like roof replacement, or like a bad old wiring and caught on fire, right? Like, there were just some that I just felt like, I don't want to handle the risk of managing this anymore. So we're selling off some of those older, more time bomb ones, and then taking that capital and then redeploying it in cash flow. But it's definitely a process. They're not liquid assets, which is a benefit because it controls the volatility of the pricing. But it's also, it means that it's a process to get stuff redeployed, to reallocate from one project to another. So yes, we are in that process. We have a few properties left to go, and we have to kind of anticipate and believe that we're going to find a great cash flowing investment, because you got to sell it ahead of time, and then you're sitting on some money waiting for an opportunity, because when an opportunity comes, you got to jump on it. So things that are really great deals, they fill up fast. The investors jump on those.
Yeah, and I think we do have, if anybody is interested, we do have a debt deal live right now. I don't know if you can share your screen, or you want to just talk about the deal that we have.
Yeah. So all right. So our partner, Chris Borden, he's the president of the Utah REIA. And so he sources a lot of our deals through local Salt Lake City REIA members. So this one is local in Salt Lake City. I used to live there. I think only you and me, Sasha, are we the only ones who don't live in Salt Lake City in the partnership right now? Yeah. And I used to. So you're in Hawaii, I'm in Florida. So basically, when we're doing a debt deal, they go very fast. They're hard money loans is essentially what they are. And so there's a deal that needs funding. It needs funded next week, right? So we're front loading those investments either with our own capital, or investors will fund the fund bank account with capital. And then when a deal comes up, they can quickly allocate because they already have their paperwork done. They already have their wires and stuff is sitting there waiting to deploy, because these things come up and they move really fast. And so if it's not going to be your traditional, like, hey, we've got a deal, we're going to do a webinar next week, and then like we'll get you in the portal, and you have a month or 6 weeks or 2 months to be able to fund. Hard money moves a lot faster than that. So if you're in a hard money fund, you really need to have money ready to deploy and in the bank account. And then what you would do is log into the portal, look at the deal as it comes up. If you like it, allocate, and if you don't, wait for the next one. So that's what I like about our fund, is it's customizable. We don't decide what you're going to invest in. We take each deal one at a time. So this particular one, new construction, a couple of duplexes, and they were completed and the money came back. And they said, hey, I want to take more money out again, because we want to finish the basements and put in some accessory dwelling units. So basically what it's doing is turning each of those duplexes into a fourplex. Utah, they didn't pass a law, but they're encouraging all cities to allow accessory dwelling units because of the housing shortage, especially in the Salt Lake City area. And so they make it really easy to build these ADUs back, a converted basement, a casita, detached building of some sort. So basically it is to go in and work on new construction buildings, to finish basements and put up a separate ADU. And that's one thing we did. We have a townhome in Salt Lake City, a brand new build. We rented it out. We ourselves lived in it for 2 years. And while we lived there, we finished up the basement, turned it into a 1-bedroom apartment, and then it's rented out separately, which helps to basically pay the mortgage upstairs. And then now that we're traveling around, our adult daughter and son live there, and then they manage the rentals. And so these kinds of opportunities, they move very fast. But the area is growing so much, and there's such a huge housing shortage that I'm really excited about this project, because it's a value add by adding more units, which I don't know if you're from Salt Lake City or any city where housing is in low supply, adding these kinds of units is very lucrative and a great way to add value for not very much money because the building is already existing. I think we spent like $40,000 on our basement to add a 1-bedroom, 1-bathroom apartment with a full kitchen and washer dryer. And you're just not going to get the price per unit in Salt Lake City that low ever anywhere. So for us, it's just a loan. We are getting a stated rate of return, and they are paying, and then we pay out to our investors quarterly, and it's just nice, reliable cash flow. So we're not enjoying any of the upside. It's not an equity investment. Equity, you get paid if it makes money, and if it doesn't, you don't. And so I think that there's something really nice about just reliable passive cash flow through private lending. And that's what we're focusing most of our investment money on right now.
Right. And then you're kind of, when you invest with a fund or other people on the deal, you have that much more kind of layers of due diligence, layers of a little bit more protection, versus you just going out and, being a debt lender. Mm-hmm. So that's why I also feel comfortable with that. And as well, this deal is where majority of our partners are at. And so they know the market. They can always check on the project or go physically there. And I think that was one of the issues we were having in previous investments, were that, they weren't really close to where we knew really anyone. So that's why I like this deal too.
Yeah, and I feel like I'll give you another example from somebody who called me up, and I think they were sitting on almost $3 million in cash, and from selling a house, some bonuses that they had never spent, they just were putting them in the bank, and a couple of other things. Like I think there was an inheritance, and I don't know, it was just several things, and they just were piling up this cash. Again, it's more common than you might think. And this individual just felt like, I don't know what to do with this money again. And so started looking at doing hard money loans, because that much cash, it's easy to start a hard money lending business. Usually you're looking at between 500,000 and $1 million to really do some damage there, because people are looking for 250, 500, maybe $1 million would be on the high end.
Well, and then like you mentioned before, even if you are able to lend like 50,000 or 100,000, just to say, and you get the 10%, it's $10,000, which is a good amount, fair amount over the course of a year. But if you're able to lend more, like you mentioned, if people tap into their equity or they have something in their savings that's not really doing too much, they have the potential to make, 10 times that if they have access to it.
Well, I think that the problem that this individual was having was they didn't really know anything about real estate. And so even getting access to some sort of a calculator to do due diligence on the loan before lending was like this whole hurdle they had to climb. And so they were like, oh, where do I learn how to do this? And I said, I rely on my hard money lender to do really good, accurate ARVs, because they've been doing this for a really long time. They know the after repair value. Back when I was getting hard money loans, they could look at the deal and 10 minutes later come back to me and say, hey, I've got this comp, this, and this comp, and it doesn't support what you're willing to pay for it. And so I'd be like, oh, I'm not buying this, right? So I'm looking at my hard money lender as an expert part of my team. And so a beginner lender doesn't have that kind of experience. And especially in this individual's case, they didn't really want to do a lot of active work. And I said, well, you should get a specialty and then allocate, again, some of that to be completely passive. Get it into a hard money fund, get a couple of equity investments for that higher upside. They don't need cash flow because they're both still working. And so just being able to go in and say, hey, and learn how to do it. Nobody's saying put all of this in there. That would be irresponsible. But just being able to have the freedom to use the expertise of our team, that we can quickly look these up. We can quickly advise the investor. We know exactly what paperwork needs to be. We know if for whatever reason we need to get involved in the deal towards the back end if they're running into trouble. We have perfect capability to be able to take over a project because all of us have flipping experience. And so somebody wanting to join forces with somebody who's more experienced is a huge advantage of investing in these types of deals, because you're learning along the way, because you're getting your reports and your things. And what happens is a lot of time people are like, this is easy money, right? And so we just keep doing it because a lot of times during that journey, you'll find something that you're really good at and that you want to do actively, and then everything else you do passively, because you can really only be an expert on one or maybe two things if you really want to get deep on it.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's integral, like you mentioned. You don't have to go out and learn everything about every single investment, but you do have to have people around you that maybe have the knowledge and have the wherewithal to go and ask the questions that maybe you don't even know to ask.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and one of the courses that I took at the conference, it was on FIRE, and it was one of the BP authors that had written a book on how to financial independence, retire early, and it was specifically for young people. I might have been the oldest person in the room.
Still applicable. It's never too late to start investing.
Yeah, I was actually really surprised when I got in there, like how few of the people in there were over the age of even 30. And I felt like I said, 99% of the investors that I talked to are like, I want to retire early in 5 to 10 years. And these 20-year-olds are saying the same thing. I want to be financially free by the time I'm 30, or whatever the goal was that was being stated. It wasn't any different. But the thing about when you're 20 or 30 is they were willing to do some really extreme stuff to live below their means. And the older we get, the more we get into our lifestyle and entrenched, the less extreme we're willing to go on some of those lifestyle. One of the people who's actually presenting, he was 22 and financially free, and he was working on retiring his parents by age 25. And he was renting out every room in his house. He got some FHA loans, scraping money together. I think he borrowed his down payment from somebody, and he rented out all the bedrooms, and then he didn't have any place to live. And he put up a curtain in the dining room or something and put a futon back there. So, because he just wanted to make more money and he wanted to live for free. Another guy bought this house, rented out all the rooms, and instead of taking one of the rooms for himself, just did van life in his own driveway. So it's like most of us are not willing to do that anymore. And so,
well, and at that point, right, you may have another half, a spouse, you may have kids. It's not really a longer term, strategy that you could essentially do, and you're not as mobile and as flexible, right?
Yep. So I felt like if we're going to take that message and apply it to ourselves, because I'm listening to that and your first reaction would be like, I'm not doing that, right? I'm 45 years old. I've got a couple of kids, like they're in school. Come on, they're not going to bring their friends over and live in our van in our driveway, right? But
Right.
thinking to yourself like, okay, maybe I'm not willing to do that, right? But what am I willing to do? Because part of retiring early, part of generating enough income to have passive income is exactly about living below your means. And it's not going to be a Starbucks latte that moves the needle.
Well, and I think the biggest thing too, especially for me, I'm still frugal, even though I have all these investments, I do have these different streams of income. I'm still frugal and living the way that, is very mindful of like not wasting. Like that's my whole thing is people say, oh, you're so cheap. It's like, I'm not really cheap. I just don't like to waste things, right? If there's still a full plate of food or I ate it, I didn't really like it. I'm like, man, maybe I should eat it because I pay this money to eat it. I don't want to waste it. So that's more so my mind frame. But a lot of times we get caught up, I think, too, in just being comfortable, right? If we try something that's new, it might be a little bit uncomfortable. But if other people are doing it, like you mentioned, the younger you are, the more extreme you can get, like the more risk you can take. But as you get older, you just want these kind of more steady streams coming in that are more predictable. And like you mentioned, especially with these equity deals, apartment deals, I like the fact that in 5 years, I could potentially see this big payout. And from there, I'll reinvest it or whatever the case may be. But that's what I'm comfortable with. That's what I'm aiming for. But again, I'm 37. I still have a little bit ways to go until I'm just living off all my investments and not actively investing. But at the same time, it gives you something to look forward to as well. And I think a lot of people depend, like you mentioned, on their retirement, and that's what they're going to have at the end. And for me, when I left my job in 2020, I left my retirement in my 401k, and I was like, oh, it's just like a savings account, because I knew nothing about, like investing my retirement. And when I went and looked back last year in 2022, it went from 107 down to 80,000. And I thought, oh my God, what if I was planning to retire now? Right. And it was, of course, over time, like anything else, it goes up and down. But at the same time, I was like, man, this is probably why a lot of people still work past the age of 67 or 70 because they literally can't retire on what they're going to make. So.
And I was interviewing, I was doing a podcast interview this morning, and he said something that really caught me. I've never heard it phrased quite like this before. He says, I don't know any happy retired people. And I thought, I know a lot of happy retired people, but the ones I know who are happiest are the ones who don't really have to worry about money. They're doing very well. They've invested well. They lived below their means. They were aggressive where they could afford it. And I think it's just all about deciding, like, what do I care most about? Spending money on those things and not spending money on stuff just to spend money on stuff. Like, only go after the high value targets. And they've done that. They've put in their dues. And now in their retirement, they have like a side hustle. They're still consulting. They're sitting on boards, or they are out there helping young people, mentoring and volunteering for charities.
Right. Giving back, being on boards, and just really doing probably more of that work to help the community. And I think that in itself can be something that, drives you as you get older. And you don't have to, like, I was an engineer prior to this, and one of our surveyors retired, but then I seen him working at the airport as security. And I was like, oh, why are you working? He's like, well, I'm trying to live off my retirement, but then I can't travel or I can't do these other things. So I have to get like another job in order to offset, that fun kind of income that he was going to use to go visit his grandkids. So that was just a reminder for me too. It's like, oh my gosh, this is definitely why you have to set yourself up for even the later years. And like you mentioned, you don't want the cost of putting you in a retirement home to land on your kids, or have to basically get another job when bag groceries when you're like 90 at Foodland. So
it should be something that you want to do. We always talk about like when you retire, not like never working again, because we like to have some sort of,
or like if your goal is to be able to like visit your grandkids or be around them more, help out, and spend more family time.
Yeah. Being retired is expensive. And we're not talking about broken care. We're just talking like, what if all you can do is just pay your bills, keep the lights on, you have a paid off house and you're just keeping the lights on and being able to eat, but you don't have anything left over to travel or whatever. Those are retired people who are unhappy, but they feel like they're not allowed to feel unhappy. They should be grateful because they have enough. And I think that was a thread going through the investors at this conference, because none of us in there were satisfied. And it's a very difficult place to be when you're not satisfied, when you always are striving for more, but to still appreciate what you already have. And I saw that again and again and again, being grateful for what you have while still saying, I can do better, I can do more for myself and for my community and the people around me.
Oh, I love that. Yeah. Because I'm in the same boat too, where there's always a new goal. If I hit one, there's another one. Or if I'm making this, then I could make more. But remembering to be present in the moment, and like, you're living your life. You guys are traveling. You guys are being very frugal. But look at all the memories that you're able to create, especially, not having to wait until you're 60 to try and create these moments with your kids, but you're doing it right now. So I think you're a great example of that. And so we're going to wrap it up, because we just wanted to hop on and have you guys relax with us. But next week we will be doing a webinar on how to kind of invest while working full time, balancing, everything. And it doesn't have to be scary, like we mentioned before. That's why we're here, to talk story with you guys, just let you guys get a sneak peek into what we're doing. And then also, feel free to reach out to us. Me and Emma both are very active on LinkedIn and love the communities that we're building on the platform, and want to, let you guys know you're not alone in this, trying to figure out how to get multiple streams of income, how to figure out how to spend more time with your family, doing more things that you love. So thanks, Emma, for being on.
Thanks so much for coming. See you at the
Bye.
webinar.